London and Wall Street are in a total panic today. Why? Because their era of free money for the elites is over. Kevin Warsh is President Trump's new pick for the Fed chair. But this is about much more than interest rates. It's the beginning of what President Trump is calling a Republican New Deal.
Their proposal was to raise taxes very substantially. And our proposal, which is in the great, big, beautiful New Deal, it's a New Deal in its own way. It's a Republican version of the New Deal. Right behind you is a nice picture of FDR. This is a much better deal than the FDR deal.
Now, Kevin Warsh didn't just accept the nomination. He declared war on the globalist economic model. He explicitly said that the Fed must abandon the dogma that paying workers causes inflation. He's calling out the real culprit: money printing and Wall Street bailouts. But this follows Ambassador Jameson Greer's shockwave speech in Davos last week, where he dusted off Alexander Hamilton to tell the elites, "Your system is over." I'm Susan Kokinda, and since the mid-1970s, I've tracked the war between the American system and the British Empire. So if you want to understand why the globalists are terrified of a Republican New Deal, you're in the right place. So please hit those like, share, and subscribe buttons. Help us reach more people and stay in touch. So this is what we're going to look at today: why the Kevin Warsh nomination demonstrates President Trump's commitment to the American people and not Wall Street, how Ambassador Greer's Hamilton speech is an even bigger threat to the elites, and what is the real content of President Trump's Republican New Deal. Now, if you look at much of the mainstream media's coverage of Warsh, you get a kind of whistling past the graveyard feeling. Many of the headlines uncharacteristically reported the fact of his appointment with no screaming adjectives, not exactly typical of the New York Times or National Public Radio. But scratch a little deeper and the fear starts seeping in. The Atlantic Council, which is the voice of NATO and the Anglo-American elites, worried that Warsh and Treasury Secretary Bessent are in sync in their attacks on how the Fed has saved Wall Street at the expense of Main Street. Here's what the Atlantic Council's lead international economist said. Warsh believes the Fed has distorted the healthy functioning of the U.S. economy through its injections of money into the market, helped assets on Wall Street at the expense of Main Street, and taken on the role of implementing fiscal policy. Guess who else thinks exactly the same thing? Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. But it gets even better. The Atlantic Council author spelled out the consequences of this. What does this mean for the global economy? If you're a country looking to the Fed to jump into the fray during an economic crisis, you may be in for a rude awakening. This is not going to be the Committee to Save the World Fed of Ben Bernanke, Janet Yellen, and Jay Powell. Or CNBC, which ran the headline, "Kevin Warsh touts regime change at the Fed." They really did use the word regime change, and so did Kevin Warsh. Now, you're going to get a counter-narrative from some establishment mouthpieces who are either whistling past the graveyard or hoping to control Warsh, like the Council on Foreign Relations, which consoles itself with this analysis: Kevin Warsh won't revolutionize the Fed. Or the central banker's central banker, Mark Carney, who's going to try and play nice by praising Warsh. But anyone who looks at the Warsh nomination in isolation of everything else this administration is saying or doing is not looking at the bigger picture. Look at the second part of that CNBC headline, the part about partnership with the Treasury. Here's what they said. Both Bessent and Warsh have historically made clear that the Fed has gotten outside of its lane and that the Treasury needs to play more of its historical role. And here's what Warsh himself said in 2010. The Fed's financial stability responsibilities should not give license to central bankers to be emergency capital providers. Capital allocation should reside, if anywhere, with the fiscal authority and its fiscal agent, the Department of Treasury. Now, that gets us to the battle that's been going on for over 200 years. The battle between the American system of Alexander Hamilton and the British imperial system. But before we go deeper, if you're starting to see that this fight is about something much bigger than interest rates and monetary policy, and that this is at the heart of the fight to make America great again, then go to Promethean Action and subscribe to our free newsletter and keep yourself in the loop. Because this isn't just about interest rates. It's about a return to the economic model that built this country. And to understand the stakes, you need to understand what happened to those champions of the American system throughout our history. Now, the American system was openly put on the table of, at all places, Davos. Everyone saw the fireworks at Davos. They saw President Trump and Commerce Secretary Lutnick telling the assembled so-called elites that globalism had failed and their very reason for being was over. You saw Scott Bessent's multiple and masterful takedowns of Gavin Kneepads Newsom. But the real killer shot was delivered by Special Trade Ambassador Jameson Greer in his speech entitled "The Hamiltonian Economic System That Too Many Have Forgotten." Here's how he began.
On December 5th, 1791, America's first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, delivered something called the Report on Manufactures to Congress. In that report, Hamilton articulated a plan for the United States to shake off its economic dependency on the British Empire. In that report, Hamilton argued for a strong economic policy that would allow America to become an industrial power. He called for a combination of tariffs and subsidies to incentivize industrialization. Hamilton believed that such measures were necessary to promote the development of industries, like textiles at the time, that needed protection from dominant foreign producers to develop the scale that would allow them to supply US needs and also be globally competitive. This vision, as I will discuss, laid the foundation for American and even global prosperity in the 19th and 20th centuries.
Now look at that title again. The Hamiltonian Economic System That Too Many Have Forgotten. Well, it wasn't just forgotten. Here's what they don't tell you in the history books. Every American leader who seriously pursued Hamiltonian economics got assassinated, starting with Alexander Hamilton, who was shot in 1804 by Aaron Burr. Hamilton's genius had made us economically sovereign, with a national bank that ensured our independence from the Bank of England and his system of tariffs that protected our manufacturing and our workers. Abraham Lincoln, well, he was shot in 1865. Why? For pursuing the same policies of national banking, tariffs, and internal improvements. And then William McKinley in 1901. Now, McKinley has become more in the public eye recently because President Trump is constantly pointing out that McKinley's tariffs made us wealthy and industrially strong, and he was assassinated too. If you want to know more of the history of how it is that it's the British who assassinate our presidents, check out our ebook on our website. The link is in the description. Now, what happened 12 years after McKinley was assassinated? The United States fell to the British-run central banking system with the establishment of the Federal Reserve. Now think again about the appointment of Kevin Warsh and his alignment with Scott Bessent on tilting the balance away from the Fed to the Treasury for the benefit of Main Street. So when the Democrats or even some of the lunkheaded Republicans try and turn the Warsh nomination into an academic debate of interest rates, remember that history and realize that something very, very big is happening. So what does very big actually look like? Now, you're not going to hear about it in the political chatter or in market commentary. You'll see it on the ground, in factories and in paychecks. Let me show you. President Trump emphasized the same point that Warsh made about the Fed throttling growth in Thursday's cabinet meeting when he said this.
Go back 20 years, 25 years, I'm old enough to remember. When we had good news, when you announced good news, the stock market went up. You announced anything good, the stock market went up. You announced bad, the stock market went up. And that's the way it should be. But now it's over the last 15 or so years, if you announce good news, that means they're going to raise interest rates because they want to kill it. So you can never really be that successful because you announce all record numbers, great, 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 because they're afraid of inflation. But growth doesn't have to have any impact on inflation. It can make inflation go down in many cases.
And that is how it works. The Fed has been deliberately strangling American growth to protect Wall Street and their international brethren in London and elsewhere. This is the British model of economics. Sacrifice everything. Industrial growth, wages, productivity, to feed a financial cancer. What is passed for economic discussion has always been about money or financial flows. But Trump's cabinet meeting wasn't about that. It was about workers. It was about production and Main Street. Trump did call it a Republican version of the New Deal. But here's what that actually looks like on the ground. Not in financial markets, but in factories and in the lives of working families. They talked about the $18 trillion being invested right now, with thousands of businesses, plants, and equipment all over the country springing up. And to the applause of the entire cabinet, Treasury Secretary Besant announced that for the first time in 26 years, the United States produced more steel than Japan. And he said to the president, that is entirely driven by your tariffs. They also reported that John Deere announced 2 new massive plants being built in Indiana and North Carolina. The North Carolina plant will build excavating equipment. There hasn't been an excavator built in this country in 50 years, and this plant is relocating from Japan back to the United States because of President Trump's tariffs. Now, here's a map which shows just a few of the other factory restarts where we are gearing up a productive capacity here at home that we haven't had in decades, like a graphite processing plant in New York, the first one in the U.S. in 70 years. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told the president, "You've changed America and created the golden age." It is a golden age out of a dark age of economic destruction. But if you're listening to the mainstream press, or if you're caught up in today's MAGA world social media storm, whatever it is, you're going to miss this. And Small Business Administrator head Kelly Loeffler said just that.
The most important and underreported war that this president ended was Joe Biden and the Democrats' war on Main Street and hardworking families. We've seen it as I've gone across the country this month, 10 different states, and we saw it when we were together in Iowa. Hardworking families, farmers, small businesses expressing gratitude, lined up to thank you. I was out with our great vice president last week in Toledo, Ohio. They are thanking this administration for getting Main Street back. The Trump tax cuts, the tariffs, deregulation, it's all rocket fuel for hardworking families and Main Streets.
This is what the empire hates. A nation with economic sovereignty, a robust middle and working class with rising wages and hope for the future. And that's what Donald Trump is delivering. And he isn't asking the City of London or the Federal Reserve permission any longer. His $20 trillion in foreign investments is channeling money directly into the economy outside of the Fed. So manufacturing is back, small businesses are reviving, wages are rising, energy is flowing. And now he's put his man in at the Fed so the Fed can't get in the way. That's the Republican New Deal. Not bailouts for banks, but production for workers. The American system is coming back. So to wrap it up, Kevin Warsh isn't just a Fed nominee. He's a declaration of war on the Wall Street bailout machine and a direct challenge to decades of British-style central banking independence. Jameson Greer's Hamilton speech at Davos is the resurrection of the American system. And Donald Trump's Republican New Deal isn't a slogan, it's here. But like SBA Administrator Loeffler said, you're not hearing this. And if you're not hearing it, you can't organize with it, which is why you need to join us at Promethean Action. We don't just analyze, we give you what you need to organize the forces in this country that will ensure that President Trump succeeds. And paying members and contributors will help us do that. So please join and get active in this fight. The modern British Empire is panicking because the fight is out in the open. Commerce Secretary Lutnick said it at Davos, globalization is over. Fed nominee Warsh said it, Main Street, not Wall Street. And the cabinet meeting celebrated it. The enemy knows that if Trump succeeds and the American system comes back to life, their century of control is over, just in time for our 250th birthday. This has been your Saturday Brief. Thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com.